Marin Naran, Yamandumarang, Baladu Wiradjuri Yuandu Alison Barnes. G'day, my name's Alison Barnes and I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman, and I'd like to welcome you today to the Women's Health Research, Translation and Impact Network's webinar on resources for working with Indigenous communities and where to find them. I've chosen this particular image today for the slide, which, there we go, there's the rest of it. This is my friend Becky, and it's a beautiful image created by Ben Pearce. And I chose this in particular for today because one of the things that I think is really important to know about Aboriginal women is that we're never just one thing. We're artists and dancers and, like my friend Becky, absolutely kick-ass women who jump out of helicopters with chainsaws in their hands to fight bushfires in remote locations on their work days. Other times, she's a beautiful dancer who's worked internationally and who dances with Wagana and is an amazing person. And every Aboriginal woman you know is going to be maybe not just like Becky, because she's kind of special, but similar to Becky in that we do more than one thing. We have more than one capability. And I think that's really important to know and to acknowledge. And that means that you don't have to just research us. You can work with us to do research. There you go. So today I'm sitting here in the beautiful country of the Darug and Gundungurra people in the beautiful Blue Mountains just west of Sydney. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, for their ongoing connection to and care for country, waterways and community. And I extend that respect to whomever are the traditional custodians of the land that you're joining us from today. I was about to say put it in the chat, but I don't think we do that here. Never mind. Anyway, I hope you enjoy today, and I'd like to hand over to Annie Carey Doyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. And I also would like to pay my respects to everybody. Thank you very much for all the people who've come, and thank you very much, Alison, for that beautiful welcome. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm coming from Whārawal country, but my mother was Cadigal and my father was Winninini Budgery. So I'm hoping you can see my beautiful flowers. Give me a yes, Alison.
Yes, I can see you.
You're the best. So I'm just quickly going to talk about this because I know that we've discussed this a lot, and there's a lot of it on our website anyway, if you want to look up Marajulu Jadigal Marlin Sphere. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the principles in working with us. So really the first thing is, if you want to have calm waters when you're researching, you've got to have integrity and be your word. So if you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you can't, then communicate and say why you can't. Because trust me, if you lose integrity or you can't be your word, you are going to hit some really rough seas. So your research means know what your community you're going to be working in, look at the history of their community. And we've written some sad but very interesting papers around how the history of a place affects the health. And there's a nice research occurring now in Wollongong around the same sort of thing, about how the history of a local community affects the health of that particular research. And you don't need me to explain why that is, but otherwise you'll be in deep waters. And if you're in deep waters and you haven't done those two things, trust me, you are going to sink. But if you do sink, there's plenty of people who are around you who can help you. You can find your mentors at your particular university, or any one of us will help you, or any of the other resources that the other ladies are going to share with you. Because to do working with us, you need resilience. You need to be able to know when you're going to have rocky shores and when you're going to do well. And you need to have doing well in as the community for your main core value. But we do have some lovely principles, and I'm hoping that you might recognize some of these beautiful photos. But let me just show you this beautiful, we'll just skip verification. Calm down, calm down. You might recognize some of these people. please tell me, Alison, if you can see and hear this video.
What makes a good partnership with Aboriginal communities?
Respect,
Self-reflection,
Friendship,
consistency,
willingness to learn,
trust,
trust.
Aboriginal people often say that they are the most over-researched people in the world, and you come to think, why is this the case? That's largely because a lot of the research that's been done in Aboriginal communities often hasn't met the needs of the community.
A lot of people have no idea where to start when it comes to researching Aboriginal communities or ways to do it appropriately. What makes me passionate is being able to get the information out there so that we don't have this whole flood of research continuing to happen with Aboriginal communities that doesn't need to happen.
It's the community that knows best what they need to actually best benefit them.
It's really important that for non-Aboriginal organisations or non-Aboriginal people working with Aboriginal communities, they understand the importance of pacing their engagement and taking that time. And when you're taking that time, it's really about building an understanding of the community, their history, and importantly, their strengths.
A lot of this is actually achieved through building the relationships through yarning. So yarning is quite an informal, I guess, conversation. It's not just a matter of what you say in the meeting, but rather actually what you say outside the meetings, how you are with them, getting to know them.
I need to ensure that I'm trustworthy and I'm known. It's who you deal with in communities. It's important. You always speak to the elders. Then it trickle down to the other level within the community.
Respect Aboriginal leadership and to recognise that there needs to be proper governance.
Get an understanding from their perspective about what's driving their engagement and what are the outcomes we want to achieve as part of this partnership.
Working in partnership with Aboriginal communities around health, I think it's really important that we recognise that health and wellbeing is not just seen through that Western biomedical lens. It's really important to consider health in the holistic concept. So health for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is really about the physical, the social, emotional, the cultural and the spiritual health and well-being of not just the individual but the community as well.
In partnerships, it's important that leaders acknowledge that they don't know everything and they need to learn about their partners. They need to be open to new ideas and they need to respect the perspectives of their partners.
From my perspective of a non-Aboriginal person, what makes a really good partnership is listening to the community, building relationships with the community, and having that transparency to achieve the outcomes that you want together.
I think what makes a great partnership with Aboriginal communities is having a shared idea. If we can agree on a shared problem, a shared way of looking at the solution and working together towards that solution, that's when a project is successful.
For a good partnership with the Aboriginal community, at first, listen what people want in a partnership. What do they expect in the partnership? What outcomes they want in a partnership? There's a lot of things you look at that you want to make sure that partnership are level.
I think it's really important to be clear around what the word partnership actually means and recognising that that word can mean different things for different people.
Openness,
Mutual benefit.
Time.
Transparency.
And integrity.
Really, at the end of the day, it's about that mutual respect and trust.
I know, are they gorgeous women or what? So that's on our website anyway, if you want to look at that. The other thing really that we want to talk about is just taking care of yourself and having the courage to do it, because we know that sometimes it can be a complicated space to work in, but bottom line is have fun, because we are hilarious, me especially. And now I'm handing it back over to Amy. And I'm stopping sharing. Or is it Alison I'm handing over to?
I think it's, yeah. Alison, did you have anything else?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, Kayla.
Okay, yeah, we'll go back to Alison then.
Okay, so it's back to me. Sorry, I was confused for a moment. It's kind of normal. So I got thrown into this at the last minute. So my apologies if I'm giving you information that you already know. But at midnight last night, when I started working on this, it was just, these are the things that I think are important and where I think are good places to get that information from. So I think it's really important, if you're going to be working with Aboriginal people, Aboriginal women in particular, that you understand who you're working with. You need to understand the community and the individuals that you're working with. And the best place to get this kind of baseline information, if it's a new place to you, is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They have a range of information that can tell you all sorts of things about people. It's kind of disturbing, really. For example, the average Aboriginal woman is 24 years old. She has 2.3 children. She's employed, but she probably only earns about 73% of the amount of income of non-Indigenous women of her age. She has aging parents and grandparents. That's good and bad. It's good because our elders are getting older, but it's not so good because the caring responsibilities usually fall on the shoulders of Aboriginal women. The majority of Aboriginal women live in houses which are likely to be rented, but we are increasing in home ownership. It's up to about 45% from the most recent stats I could find. She's probably completed Year 10 or above. 1 in 3 Aboriginal people in New South Wales are in education. And your average Aboriginal woman probably lives in one of 3 places. It's either Western Sydney, the Central Coast, or Western New South Wales. And I feel like I missed something there, but anyway. The ABS can also give you information about specific health problems. And if you're going to do any kind of health-based research, it's a good idea to get this information so that you can find out whether or not the people that you're going to be researching are actually going to have the problems that you want to research about. I did a terribly scientific bit of research myself last night and got a group of mates on a Zoom call and asked about what are the things that matter to you as an Aboriginal woman? And 5 out of 5 people said family, children, culture, community, health, reducing racism, and making sure that the future we leave our children is better than the one that they were born into. So if you're going to do Indigenous research, you need to figure out which, you don't need to, but it's a really good idea to figure out which methodology you're going to be using. And if you're going to bother choosing a methodology, choose an Aboriginal or an Indigenous one because, you know, a little bit biased. I can share these slides later if anybody wants to look at this teeny tiny print because it can be quite hard to read. I do feel obliged to point out that the first bit of Indigenous research methodology that's listed here is by Doyle et al., who is my boss. Whatever methodology you choose, you do need to ensure that it recognises Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous knowledge, that it honours social protocols or social mores, depending on how big a humanities person you are. It needs to emphasise the social, historical and political context which Aboriginal women live in. We are not, if you're teaching health or in any of the schools, often when you get a case study, for example, it's just a 34-year-old woman with chest pain. A 34-year-old woman who has 4 kids at home, who is a single mum, who is caring for her elderly parents and disabled older brother who was in a terrible car accident. You need to tell the whole story. Just giving the bare bones doesn't tell us anything, and it doesn't acknowledge the reality of life for Aboriginal women, which I think is super important. Indigenous research methods need to privilege Indigenous voices always, and it needs to identify and address issues of importance to Indigenous people, not the researchers who are there talking to them. I was recently on a panel discussion somewhere else, and I was told that I didn't know what research should be done, but the person who was telling me this was a man, and it was research about women. He was not Indigenous, and it was research about Aboriginal women. And it was from my home out in the Central West, where I'm from. And he was not from there, but he knew more than I did. It didn't really go down very well. But anyway, we also need to understand pedagogy, because I think if you understand how you're working, you can work through. We talk about Aboriginal ways of knowing, being, and doing, and it trips off your tongue so easily. But if you know how you're working, Aboriginal ways of doing, then you can incorporate that into your research work, which will make life easier. And this is just an infographic, a graphic from 8 Ways, which is my personal favorite pedagogy. And it's my presentation, so I can. The other thing that I think is really super important, as I mentioned in my welcome, is that you need to collaborate with Aboriginal people, both as researchers and as the people who are being researched. And if you're looking for information and you go to the AHNMRC website, they will talk in particular about, do you have Aboriginal governance over your research project? And it doesn't just have to be having a governance group, a resource group that you can go to of people from that community, but you can have researchers like this one or any of the other people that you see today. And you need to, because we're fun to work with, Aboriginal people generally are fun to work with. No bias there at all, I'm sure. But also we can help you with the social mores and tricky things like, there's been a death in the community. Do we go up this week or do we give people time? As you saw in the video, the correct answer there would be to give the community time to heal, to grieve and to mourn and to start to get a bit better before you start bombarding them with research questions and information, demanding information from them. You also need to do engagement, and having Aboriginal people on your team can help you with doing engagement. If you're going to have Aboriginal people on your team, they need to be at all levels. You need to have chief investigators, you need to have consultants, all the different people. They often say, but we have so many people coming to work in the health system. And I say, yeah, but most of them are not, they're not doctors, they're not registered nurses, they're not registered midwives, they're Aboriginal health workers, and they're vital, desperately important part of our system. But there need to be Aboriginal faces at every point, every level. So important. As I said, I'm happy to share these slides. These are the 6 places that I've got information from that have helped me the most in the last couple of years as I've started on my research career. There's stuff here from WHRTN, from the AHNMRC, from an organisation called, that I had never heard of until quite recently, but I wish I'd found it sooner. NERCN, I don't even know if that's how you say it. But these are the 6 things that have been the absolute biggest help to me. And again, I included one from my boss because, I like my job. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. These 2 beautiful women are from out at Bathurst, and that was a photo that was taken for Dance Rights, which is at the Opera House a couple of years ago. I think maybe even before COVID. Can't remember. But yeah, women, we're everywhere, even on top of the Opera House. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to
me?
Kezia.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Kezia's turn. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Thank you.
All right, let's
Sharing so that
see if I can share my slides. And that has been so great because I think what I've prepared is very complementary to what's already been presented. So for those who I haven't met, my name's Kezia Bennett-Brooke. I'm a Torres Strait Islander woman. I grew up and still live on Dharawal country, where I'm calling in from today in Wollongong, and would like to pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians of this land that I'm calling in from, and feel very honoured to be presenting today with these other amazing Aboriginal women. So yeah, as I said, I think what I've put together is quite complementary. So we've heard a little bit from Auntie Kerry and from Alison around some of the aspects of the frameworks that they've used and key lessons in working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and women in particular in research. And so I'm going to give a bit of an overview of some key frameworks that I think are useful to know about. And I'll also share these slides. Hopefully they can be shared with everyone afterwards, as I've included links to where everything is in the slide notes. So I thought it would be helpful first to talk about some global frameworks and, you know, recognizing that this also is not an exhaustive list, what I'm presenting here. So this first one is from the Lancet that commissioned a piece in collaboration with the Lowitja Institute in 2016. And this final Lancet paper included contributors from 23 countries and data from 28 Indigenous and tribal groups, with populations covered from all of the World Health Organization regions, and ranged from countries that are classified as low income right through to high income. And really, you know, it found that there's an incredible experience of ongoing strength and resilience amongst First Nations people across the world. But despite that, there is also a pattern of inequity that affects Indigenous populations across the globe. And so it found that Indigenous and tribal peoples generally have lower levels of health and well-being compared to other people living in the same countries and regions. And one of the key things that was highlighted in this paper was that countries need to work better on their data systems, and particularly in order to better understand the broader health context of why Indigenous peoples are unwell, and that we must prioritise the collection of good quality data and endeavour to include and identify Indigenous communities within data collections and analyses and reporting as well. So also at that global level, you may have heard of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, commonly referred to as the UNDRIP. It was globally adopted in 2007, and Australia signed on from 2009. And you can see here on the screen a couple of the, articles there around having the right to be actively involved in developing and determining health, housing and other economic and social programs, and administering programs through their own institutions, and also our rights to having access without any discrimination to all social and health services. So also at that global level is the Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of their associated targets are very relevant for Indigenous peoples as well. So you can see there on the screen it says, working with Indigenous peoples on sustainable development also demands a culturally sensitive approach based on respect for and inclusion of Indigenous peoples' worldviews, perspectives, experiences and concepts of development. So we know that there's, again, huge disparities in terms of access to quality education and health, and we need good research around that as well. And the Sustainable Development Goals speak to the self-determination and collective rights as being really critical to Indigenous health. And then finally, at that global level, the WHO, the World Health Organization, is taking action on social determinants of health equity by looking at the causes of those health inequities and really the measures around those to tackle them. So the WHO is really focused around strengthening equity-oriented health systems through intercultural care provision, looking at things like integrating human rights, equity, gender, responsive and intercultural approaches, ensuring that communities experiencing racial discrimination actually have access to comprehensive, culturally appropriate and quality health services, and addressing linkages between climate and health as well. So then looking at some of the national frameworks as well. I've got that picture on the screen there that says nothing about us without us, which hopefully is something that many of you would have heard before in this space. So of course, we've got some of the key national ethics codes and guidelines. So we've got the IATSIS Code of Ethics and the guide that's on the top left there, and the guide below it around actually how to apply the code. Really encourage you to have a look at that if you haven't before. There's some good questions in there around reflecting on your own practice and how to make sure that you actually are applying these ethical principles in the work that you do. Of course, the NHMRC has some resources that are critical with doing work within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. So there's the Ethical Conduct in Research document, which is a guideline for researchers and stakeholders. And then the one below that is the Keeping Research on Track document, which is really around asking questions of both researchers, but also of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities around research that they might be involved in, and making sure that it is appropriate and respects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander worldviews and priorities in any research that's undertaken. Then in terms of the state level, we've got, there's a number of different bodies and procedures that exist in different states. I've put the picture there on the right-hand side, which is from the WHRTN Institute website, which I think is a useful place to go to because it lists all of the different states and the various bodies there. And then on the left, you can see the New South Wales Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council key principles, which I think are fantastic to look at, and you know, really complement what's in the national NHMRC ethical guidelines as well. Then there's some examples here of companion documents that can really help with your understanding as well. One there from SAMRI, from the Telethon Kids Institute, and another one here from the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress, all again giving, you know, really complementary advice around how to actually apply the ethical standards, and a guide for what it means to do appropriate community engagement and research in this space too. So I've also included a couple of resources here around data sovereignty. I think data sovereignty is becoming, or has been around for quite a while, but increasingly becoming recognised as a critical component of research in the health space, and you know, really being premised on that United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples around recognising that we as Indigenous peoples have the rights to govern the collection, the ownership, the application of data about us. And you can see there around the points: control, develop, use, maintenance and protection. Again, the WHRTN Institute has some good fact sheets and resources around this, but there's a number of different Aboriginal authors who write in this space, who I recommend you have a look into as well. The WHRTN Institute also, again, has some amazing resources. They actually have a whole resource hub on their website. You can go and have a look at various different topics. So there's a couple of examples here on the screen, which I think are, they're a few years old now, but still particularly useful if you are a supervisor of an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student, and also a practical guide there for researchers. So lots of great information in there, and I think particularly important if you are working in this space or supervising Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander students, that you do critically reflect on your role in supervising and supporting First Nations students. So this here is an example of a university. Well, this is actually from the Universities Australia website, the Indigenous strategy that sort of overpins all universities, but you'll find that most universities within Australia have their own strategies around supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and often have really helpful guidance around research. And I've found as well, I think a lot of unis have some great resources that they've pulled together themselves, particularly around things like terminology guides or who to contact locally to engage appropriately with communities as well. Then there's also a number of examples of documents that assist with understanding cultural protocols and how to work with particular groups, such as young people, families, women, and another example here of a terminology guide from the Australian Indigenous Health Infonet, which is also another great repository of information if you haven't been there before. When it comes to government, there's also a number of different documents that have been pulled together, some better than others, I would say. Here's a couple of examples on the screen. You can see the National Health Plan there. There's papers that were put together probably around 10 years ago. They're looking at that date, 2013, from the Closing the Gap Clearinghouse at the time. Even though they're 10 years old, there's still some critical information in there around what's needed to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and actually develop effective working relationships. So really good starting point, but definitely something to be complemented with other resources if you're going to have a look at those. And then there's the New South Wales Medical Research Guide in undertaking appropriate Aboriginal health research as well. Also a shout out for Nirakan. They were the National Indigenous Research and Knowledges Network, which I believe they finished up in 2020. So they're in more of a legacy phase now, but their website is still live and has lots of really helpful links, particularly again for students and also for supervisors of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in there too. But anyone who's conducting research in this space, there's a lot that you can find in one local spot there on their website. And then finally, I was calling out this video as well, which Auntie Kerry showed us at the start. It's always awkward watching yourself on camera after being filmed, but great to see that video. And I think there's a number of different video type resources that you can find on YouTube, but that's one of the best ones there. So as I said at the start, I've put all of the links to these resources that we've pulled together in the notes to my presentation. So hopefully they can be shared with everyone afterwards so that you can access those. But that's it from me. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thanks, guys. So we have the panel section, which is probably more of a Q&A section of the webinar now. There's nothing in the Q&A box. I don't think people are able to talk. But if anybody has any questions, if you just wanted to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, just wait a couple of minutes and see if anything pops up. Got a baby down here.
Can I ask Kez then? Kez, I know that you work in the George Institute. So have you got any stories that you could share, how you've done really well or what might not have worked when you were researching?
Yeah, sure. I can, there's so many different examples of what's worked well or what hasn't worked well, but maybe I could talk to some of the organizational structures we've put in place in order to make things work well. So I think a number of years ago, before we had a formalized Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health research program at the George, there were little bits of Aboriginal health research happening in different teams, but there was no sort of coordinating program around that or process around supporting particularly non-Indigenous researchers working in this space. And so I think there were examples where, you know, people hadn't necessarily read many of those resources or understood the appropriate way of working in this space, so might have rushed into trying to engage with a community that already had an existing relationship with another researcher. So, you know, there might have been issues around overburdening or not understanding the important context of time and appropriate governance that needed to be in place in connecting with communities. So, you know, we have an internal research committee that all research relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health must come through and talk to first before going any further, and kind of being that first port of call for giving guidance around what's actually appropriate and what's not. And often it is actually sharing a lot of those resources that were in the presentation there with people to say, hey, actually, before you sort of come into this space, make sure that you've read some of these things, understand what's appropriate. And yeah, I think that's been one of the key things that's worked well in our space. And I think also making sure that people recognise those key principles around what's actually beneficial for communities, and providing opportunities for employment or research capacity building or other types of skills development, and really centering those in the research is really critical, and something that we've really pushed in all of the work that we do as well.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Kezia. So we do have a question. We have two questions. So the first one is, how demanding is it for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to respond to requests to be involved in research? And what are your suggestions for approaches?
Go, Alison.
Sorry, I just realised I was meant to be answering that, not just thinking about it. I think it can be incredibly demanding for Aboriginal people. We are the most researched people on Earth, or at least somehow that it feels that way. And you can be a little bit overwhelmed because you want to say yes to everybody, because, you know, you can see the importance of everything, but you can't, because, you know, you still have jobs and kids and parents and lives to live as well. So you can either create a job for yourself where you can participate in research that is important to you as an Aboriginal person, which is what I've done, or you can just learn to be really choosy about what you agree to do. And mostly when I am being choosy, I choose things that I'm passionate about. Just recently, I answered an ad for it. They were looking for a consultant, and so I answered the ad, and I got chatting with the lady who was the manager of the research project, big project nationwide, and they wanted to include at least 10% of their research participants as Aboriginal people. And whilst they had a really good governance group around this big nationwide project, there were no Indigenous researchers. So I bullied my way into being a chief investigator of that project, because you can't do research about us without us. But it also happens to be something that's personally very important to me, because it's something that affects me in my, you know, regular life, not just work life. And it's an emerging area, so I think that interests me as well. So that's one way that you can do that. Choose things that you're passionate about, and if you're a non-Indigenous researcher or any kind of researcher, and you need some Indigenous participation, just ask. The worst that can happen is that nobody says yes. You still haven't lost anything. You haven't gained anything, but you also haven't lost anything.
That was great. Thank you, Alison. So the next question, so thank you for a great presentation. You've all been so informative. So my question relates to how existing projects can engage with Indigenous communities. We're a longitudinal study for young people with period problems and would like to include Indigenous young women, but haven't had much success to date. So I don't know if Kezia, if you wanted to answer this one, or Alison.
Sure. I guess it's always ideal to involve Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in something if that's what's desired from the very get-go, but I do recognise that that's not always the case with research. But I think I'd be curious to know more about what hasn't worked so far in terms of that existing attempt to engage. It'd be good to know more about that context, because I think that there's probably some answers in there around what might not have worked well. But I think you just need to open up the conversation with someone, and as Alison just said, you need to ask, and sometimes you might get a no, but I think that's okay. There's not only one avenue to go down. There are other groups that you could speak to, and I think ideally you want someone who is in your research team, an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person in your research team, and you want to be making sure that you are giving opportunities for other capacity building or employment within that larger program. And if you are going to be researching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you also have a responsibility, I think, to participate in some critical self-reflection around the actual research methodology and the methods that you're using in terms of the research that you're doing. Alison, you might want to add on. Yeah.
Can I add something there? You also need to think about how you're presenting your research to people. Do you have AHMRC ethics approval? Are you advertising that? Do you have any partner organisations that you're working with? People like Aboriginal Medical Services or other community-controlled organisations? Are you advertising that? Aboriginal people are going to be, and Torres Strait Islander people, sorry, New South Wales Health beat the Torres Strait out of me. So I'm so sorry. You need to be able to, as an Aboriginal person, if you're looking at a piece of research and who's doing it and all that stuff around it, you need to be able to trust those organisations. And if you're just Joe Bloggs, the researcher from XYZ University, I don't know you. I don't know anything about you or the research that you're doing or how you're doing it or who you're doing it with. I'm not going to answer your questions. But if I see that you're working with a known organisation and you're partnering with my local AMS and you've got AHMRC ethics approval, then I'm going to think that these people, they probably know what they're talking about, and they're probably going to do it in a culturally appropriate way. So I'll feel safe to talk to you. I might end up not agreeing to work with you, but I'll have a chat at least. But I'm not going to do it unless I have something to trust. Because we have been burnt so many times in the past. And I'm sure anyone of my age or older will agree with that. And probably even younger people, we've been burnt a few times. So we need to trust you. And if I don't know you, you need to partner with someone I can trust.
That was great. Thank you to you both. So we've got a couple more questions. So when completing a human research ethics application, a clinical trial, one of the questions asks if research will involve the following participants, one of which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So the question is, if the project is not specific to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we could still potentially recruit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples if they have this particular disease process and undertake informed consent process. I never know how I never know how to quite answer this. Any advice? Sorry.
I can answer that one. You should write yes, because you don't, if it's not in the inclusion or exclusion criteria of your research or your clinical trial, you are likely to stumble across at least one or two. But I would put down in your methodology that you are not specifically, it's not part of your inclusion criteria, just so that the ethics people know that you're aware that you might come across some people. The other issue is then that if it's an issue that might affect Aboriginal people, you still will probably have to go through whatever the AH and MRC is in your state, because I'm not sure where you're from, Deanne. But good question. People trip over that a lot. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie Kerry. So how would you recommend we best engage with Aboriginal peoples and communities if trying to engage as a tertiary service? Our data shows huge inequity, but when talking to communities, they don't see it as a priority issue. Don't see it as a priority. Issues are pressing, but also don't want to act without community and Aboriginal involvement from the beginning. So it's a great question. So I don't know if Alison or Kezia, if one of you wanted to answer it.
If community aren't feeling that the thing that you think is very pressing, you either need to convince them that you're right and they're not, or you need to let it go and wait a while and try again. If you can't impose research on us, because we just won't participate. But something might be a problem that I'm not aware of, or it might be a problem, and because everyone in my community is disadvantaged in the same way, I might not realize that we're all disadvantaged. So I'm open to being convinced, but if you can't convince us, you can't do the research, because we just won't.
And I think, oh, sorry.
No, go, Kiss.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes communities do know that, you know, we have multiple pressing issues, but it's just not actually a priority for us at that particular time. We've got multiple other things that people are juggling, you know, particularly if you're trying to approach an AMS, like there's huge burdens on systems and other priorities that people are working on. And even though it might feel like it's a huge priority in terms of that as a research need, it just may not be up the list for someone at that point in time. And that doesn't mean that it won't be at some point, but you just need to, respect that, you know, it might not be the right time to engage on that at a particular point.
Everything has a time.
Yeah, I remember doing the rollout to look at chroming or, you know, petrol sniffing in some of the more remote territories, and we wanted to roll out opal fuel, which was a good idea. So we went to a particular community because, you know, chroming leaves so many horrible health issues, you know, like, anyway, so wanted to roll this out. We went to the elders and they said, yeah, that's a good idea, but our priority is employment, you know, like that's the reason why they chrome. So if you can't fix employment, then it doesn't matter what you do, they'll find something else. And that's a valid point. So everything that we do now is requested by community. We don't go in and go, listen, you know, we're going to fix your diabetes or anything. We go, what's your most pressing priority? Sometimes they say things we can't fix, like housing, but we still can research housing and look to see how we can influence and write policies for people, which is what should come out of research.
So that's sorry, I think we might have more questions. Okay, so do you suggest offering services alongside of health research? Try out solutions as you go and treat conditions when you find them. I'm guessing that's when you research, yeah, obviously specific to Aboriginal people.
I think it's always important to come back to that principle of benefit. And I think where there is an opportunity to give something of benefit to community, if that's what they want, then absolutely that's really useful. I think just looking at the framing of that question, treat health conditions. I think that sort of comes back again to, I just wanted to re-highlight the point around holistic health and well-being and broader determinants of health. And I think sometimes, researchers are going in with a hyperfixated focus on a particular disease area that doesn't actually recognise the broader determinants. And I mean, it speaks to exactly what Annie Carey was just saying about that example around chroming and employment. So, but absolutely, where there's an opportunity to have some sort of program implementation or resourcing that can go into community, that if that's of interest to whoever you're partnering with, I think that's always a great thing.
It's pretty disappointing from a human perspective to have some researchers come in and do research that you participate in, and then they tell you that you've got this terrible problem and they walk away. You need to not just walk away. There needs to be, if you're researching a particular disease or a particular health problem, I think you need to have something at the end of it. Like if we find that, 78% of people in this community have diabetes, that's terrible. What are you going to do about it? Because if you just walk away and leave 78% of the community with diabetes and no solutions, that's a bit ordinary, isn't it? And that's why we don't want to always participate in research, because stuff like that's happened in the past.
Yeah, and we're so past just describing problems. Like you can't just go in and describe problems and then there's no ongoing benefit or sustainability of a program or, yeah.
I don't want to be a problem. My father will tell you that I am, and have been for the last 54 years. But I don't want to just be a problem. I want to be part of the solution, and I want to be able to participate in things that are going to help me find solutions. I don't just want to be told I've got a problem, because I know. Yeah, consulting fatigue. Absolutely, Fiona, that's exactly the right term.
Yeah, that was really good. Very informative. I think that's the end of the questions. So Kezia and Alison, Courtney, who's one of the guests, has just said that she might send you an email. Was your contact information on the beginning of your slides?
I can have it.
Yeah. Either way, if you wanted to either email it through to me or and I can send it out to participants, and the slides as well that you guys would show today. If you wanted to send them to me, I can send them through to anybody who's interested. But I think that's going to wrap it up. Annie Carey, did you have any final words?
No, just thanks everybody. Have a good Christmas or happy Hanukkah or